Hi, I'm Joe Saunders of Miniature Landscape Hobbies, and in this video we're going to prepare some custom terrain to help celebrate the launch of Flames of War's new book, Bulge German Forces. If you are like me, you've been waiting for the release of Bulge German Forces for some time. As an Axis Flames of War player, the idea of adding the big cats back into the game is pretty much irresistible. And, as is normal for me, if you can call me normal, this release also means I need to get to work on some cool new terrain to go with the book. Fortunately, I have a good relationship with the crew at Battlefront, and I've been quite happy to do new terrain videos for the major launches for the last few years. Because of this, they've sent me the excellent Small Pine Woods by Gale Force 9, as well as log gun emplacements and sandbag dug-in markers that I can work with for the video. Like all GF9 offerings, these are excellent quality, and the models come pre-painted. But as you probably already know, I almost never use things straight out of the box. The Battlefield in the Box range looks good going straight on the table, but it also makes a cool option to work as a foundation for your own terrain builds. So I pretty much knew I would be repainting these pieces and then unleashing my imagination to make something that is one of a kind, functional for my games of Flames of War, and customized to fit my existing model spread. Looking over the pieces they sent, I was quite interested in the way they do their forest terrain. The trees are based in separate clusters that sit on a larger base. This implies that the trees are in area terrain, but you can move them around to make it easier to place your models. This is a cool idea, and one that I don't use in my regular builds. I tend to make all my greenery fixed, but this gave me an idea. I could duplicate the GF9 method with removable scenery using my own approach. I would also add the sandbags and log emplacements to add character, and I would make these removable from the terrain as well. At this point, I realized something else. If I did this right, I could actually make two interesting and fairly unique pieces of forest terrain by making both my own base and using the existing GF9 base to work with. So, this project is going to be a little different. A sort of terrain mashup, with a GF9 base with Miniature Landscape Hobbies features on one section, and a matching Miniature Landscape Hobbies base with GF9 features on the other. In this two-part video series, of which you're now watching part 1, we're going to dive into this build and see what we get. Let's go to work. If you like my videos, please consider leaving a tip with super thanks. I start with my custom base. Taking out the GF9 base, I put it down on a sheet of cardboard and trace around it. I want both sections I'm building to be roughly the same size. Then I move the base over again, and I turn it sideways. I go ahead and trace it out a second time. This time, though, I make it just a little bit smaller. What I want to do is have two different layers, one slightly smaller than the other. The smaller one will form the top layer, and the bottom one will give it strength. By keeping the grain of cardboard at right angles on each level, then it gives it extra reinforcement. When this is done, I lay out all the different parts, such as the tree bases and the log fortifications, on the top layer, and decide where I'm going to place them. I trace these out, and then go ahead and also draw in a spot where I'm going to put a little trail. When I've decided where everything should be, I get out a sharp knife, and I cut everything out. Turning my attention to the top layer, I then go ahead and cut out the individual pieces. I cut out the trail, the round areas where the trees will be placed, and the spots for both the sandbags and the gun emplacement. I set the round sections where the trees will be placed off to the side to form bases for later. I now have two separate pieces that I take and add hot glue to the bottom of. I push these down onto the bottom layer and then go around the edges with some masking tape. The masking tape will smooth off the gradient between layers and help protect the edges from the glues, chemicals, and paints that are coming later in the build. While I'm at this, I also wrap the masking tape around the edges of the circular bases I cut out for the trees earlier. Getting out some cut off pieces of pink foam insulation, I take a knife and cut them into more or less random shapes. I also cut them in a variety of sizes. Then I take these and hot glue them to the surface of the GF9 base and also the custom base I just made. These will be used to imply that there are some rocks lying around on the base. One thing to note is that you don't want to pack these too densely. If you do, it'll be hard to place the tree bases or models on top of the terrain at a later date. So, less is more in this case. I now go to my bits box and select a variety of different trees. I choose everything from pre-made models to ones that are on armatures to some that I've crafted myself out of bamboo skewers. I add these to the existing Gale Force 9 trees to create quite a variety of different types. I've discussed this in other videos, but I generally don't want to ever build a piece of terrain that just has a monoculture of one type of tree. I sort these out and prepare these to go on each of the individual tree bases. More on the trees in the next video, when we'll get down to work painting them. Returning to the custom base, I can now prepare to add the grit. To do this, I start by mixing up some Mod Podge and some black acrylic paint. I spread this down over the surface of the base and sprinkle over top of it with a mixture of about 80% play sand to about 20% kitty litter. When this has been layered on, I get out a pipette, load it with rubbing alcohol that's had a few drops of black acrylic ink added to it, and wet this down over the top of the grit. Lastly, I go back to my original Mod Podge mixture, water it down even more heavily, and using the same pipette, apply that down over the top of everything. The purpose of soaking the surface with the rubbing alcohol is to help the capillary action move the layers of glue back and forth between the grains of grit. This generally works pretty well, and when it's dried overnight, you get a rock-solid bond. I also take the black glue and Mod Podge mixture and spread that over top of the GF9 base and over the top of the base sections on the gun emplacement, sandbags, and circular tree bases. This will help protect them and will serve as a primer to keep all of the paint effects looking uniform in the upcoming steps. It's now the next morning, and the grit and the primer has all dried. So it's time to begin with dry brushing. I start with shades of brown. I work a dark brown up through various shades of tan until I'm happy with the earth tones on all the bases. I make sure to get the tree stands, the different emplacements, and also the Gale Force 9 base. After this, I also go to work on the rocks. I approach it exactly the same way. I dry brush them with dark gray, move my way up through light gray, and finish up with a very light dry brush of white. As is typical of paint jobs, when you're working with a lot of dry brushing, you start to lose some of your definition. So, to follow up, I get out some black ink, and with a fine brush, go and line in around the rocks and any of the shadowy areas on the bases themselves. This really returns a sense of depth to my work. At this point, the base construction is pretty much complete, so we'll leave the next steps for episode 2 in the series. We now have the Gale Force 9 pre-made base prepared along with the individual gun emplacements and tree stands. Also, we have completed the basic work to get the custom base ready. At this point, I must admit, I was kind of hesitant to show you the custom base in its current state. Ultimately, though, I decided for the sake of completeness that I better show you. I hesitate not because I don't think it looks good or that the project is going well. No, these things are fine. I hesitated because in its unfinished form, I think the base kind of looks like a Muppet from hell. Anyway, stay tuned for the next video, and we'll come back and finish the project, and finally unleash some awesome new terrain to celebrate the launch of Bulge German forces. Miniature Landscape Hobbies is your source for miniature, terrain building, and diorama content, and we can't do it without your support. We want to build a community to ensure that the wonderful art of building a miniature is accessible to everybody. To participate, please consider joining on Patreon. For $4 a month, our Patreon members benefit from 10% off at Joe Saunders Terrain in the Etsy store, 5% off paints and hobby supplies at Torchlight Games, free access to STL files, a mention in our credits, and early access to our videos. Please check it out and consider joining. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. Please remember to subscribe, press the bell button so you get immediate notification on our videos, and until next time, remember to keep building life in miniature.